And we're going to go now to the agenda item 1, which is apologies. Have we any apologies from Sinn Féin Group? Councillor McElduff? And Seamus? Any apologies?
Hello, Chair. Not that I'm aware of.
Chair, Tommy here.
Hi, Tommy.
Anne-Marie Fitzgerald and Padraig Kelly, as far as I'm aware. Chair, remove it.
Thanks for that, Tommy. Miss as well, is he? Any apologies from the Ulster Unions Group? Victor?
Thank you, Chair. The only apology that I have is Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Victor. From the DUP?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Councillor Mark Buchanan. Thank you.
Thank you, Earl. Any apologies from the SDP, Mary?
Thank you, Chair, and Paul. No apologies from ourselves tonight.
Any apologies from the Independents?
Chair, I think Councillor Keenan.
Yeah, Emmett.
Sorry, Chair. I think Councillor Keenan has sent his apology. I'm not sure if he can get out from work this evening, as far as I know.
For the minutes.
Hello.
Hello.
Councillor Clark here.
Yeah. Okay.
So, item number 2 of the meeting of the 19th of October, and we're going to move now to item 3, declarations of interest. Nothing. So go now to matters arising from the minutes of the meeting of the 19th of October. So go through page 1. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5. Page 6. And page 7. On that, Alison?
No, Chair, no matters to raise. Thank you.
Okay. Can I get a proposed seconder for that?
Chair, Councillor McKeon here, happy enough to propose that. Also, can maybe somebody check with Councillor if he's having connection issues. Might be on his own side, but maybe do no harm to get somebody to give him a wee check.
Okay. If somebody from IT could check on Barry there, thank you. So next part, we have a delegation now from Intertrade Ireland. We can welcome Kerry Kern, Policy Research Manager, and Deirdre Maguire, Manager of Brexit Advisory Service, also in attendance. So thank you for giving your time this evening to join us and give us an update on how things are progressing, and we look forward to hearing from you. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the members of the committee for inviting us along this evening. It's quite a tough topic to be able to say what changes are going to take place for firms in your district council area at the end of the transition period. And we're now just 6 weeks out, less than 50 days. And so really we're at the crunch point for a lot of firms actually getting ready for the changes, which are considerable, that lie ahead. So I'd like to take us through just some of those it will be at a relatively high level and give us plenty of opportunity for a bit of Q&A afterwards. I would also say that while I'll be taking us through the presentation, my colleague Deirdre Maguire is on the call as well. Deirdre is our Brexit Advisory Service Manager and has been valiantly helping firms in all of the preparations for Brexit over these past few years. Still much to do, and a lot of firms still with preparations to make, and I will come to that. But I have a short presentation actually that I'd like to go through, just because as I'm talking, it'll be useful to see the terms that I'm using. So my apologies to those members of the committee that are phoning in today. I will, however, share these slides with you all. So these are very through Kieran. So you will get them separately. So I'm just going to attempt to share my content here with you. It'll be my first time doing it on WebEx. So almost success. There we go. Hopefully you can all see what I'm saying. My first slide. Yes.
Yep.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Just to introduce myself a little bit, I'm the Policy Research Manager at Intertrade Ireland. And over the past 3-4 years, I've been working with departments in Northern Ireland, in Ireland, and also in London, and with regional representative bodies too from elsewhere in the UK, in order to fully understand what the impact of all of the changes that are taking place will be. And you may imagine that's been a bit of a moving feast as well over this past period of time. But really, maybe a wee bit about Intertrade Ireland and the context in which I'll be presenting to you. So we are the cross-border body established as a result of the Good Friday Agreement, and our remit is very much on business development on the island of Ireland and increasing innovation collaboration across the island as well. We've been delighted to see cross-border trade value increasing across the island at a rate of 4% per annum over the past 20 years, and it now stands at 6.5 billion worth of trade each year. And you can see from the figures in the bottom here that the real, I suppose, winner in that trade-off is Northern Ireland and the Northern Irish economy, which benefits from almost 2/3 of that trade value. And that's something that we want to see continue to grow, regardless of the changes that lie ahead. And I do think that's achievable. But I think when we take it right down to a district level, it's important to recognise who's actually undertaking that trade. And the vast majority of it, 99%, has been undertaken by SMEs, so very small firms. Almost 2/3 of it from Northern Ireland into Ireland has been undertaken by micro firms with less than 10 employees. And we know from the research that we've undertaken at Intertrade Ireland that those firms are more likely to just be trading within their local geographical area. And that will be very much the case for firms within your district who have such a long border with Ireland. So they would just be trading within the geographic space that they're in, and not necessarily considering the export trade. And that's something that we'll need to keep in mind. But looking down into your county in a bit more detail, these figures are from the NISRA survey, which there's quite a lag on the data, so the latest available data is from 2018. We're actually hoping 2019 data to be out next month. But it shows that in terms of export trade, from Annanoma District Council benefits from 278 million worth of exports to the south each year. That's something that's actually grown at quite a sizable rate over the past 7 years that the data goes back. So it's been almost a third uplift in that since 2011, which is great to see. What we're not seeing in terms of the numbers of firms that are exporting is that it's only 537, which is actually lower than it was back in 2011. So it's actually fewer firms doing a lot better in terms of their export activity. And so the challenge for your council area will be identifying, if you haven't done so already, the areas within which those firms are exporting and the potential impact on those very particular goods, products and product flows, whether it's north, south, east, west, and where those firms sit within their supply chains. So quite a bit of detail to be understood there in order to understand the actual impact at a council level. And I mentioned supply chains and flows of trade because really when we get to the real heart of the matter with Brexit, it really will depend on, the impact will depend on the direction of trade, where firms sit within their supply chains and the products that they're trading. And we know from our work on the island of Ireland that the vast majority of exports from Northern Ireland into Ireland are intermediate goods. They're components within supply chains, and how those supply chains are impacted will very much depend on a number of factors, some of which are still to be decided. So taking it down to what the Northern Ireland Protocol, just as a starter for 10 here, we know that the Northern Ireland Protocol is, I suppose, the revised backstop. Does allow for the free movement of goods from Northern Ireland into Ireland, which is great. It gives us not just access to the Irish market in that context, but to the whole of the EU market. It means that there won't be any customs paperwork and trade will flow pretty much as it does now. But in order to achieve that, and this is the difficulties that will arrive in terms of east-west flow, the Northern Ireland goods need to align with EU regulations. And so where divergence occurs as a result of divergence in the rest of the UK, that's where issues arise with regard to the need for customs and evidence of origin. In addition, the Northern Ireland Protocol is great for goods in terms of flow from the council area into the rest of the EU, but it doesn't include services, and that has a number of knock-on impacts, not just for services trade, but also for goods trade and for general operations of firms in relation to their VAT flows and invoicing systems, which I will mention. But it also doesn't consider the impact on east-west integrated supply chains. So we as an organisation are very focused on strengthening those strategic supply chains on the island of Ireland. But the fact is, the Northern Irish firms trade very strongly both with Ireland and with GB. We know this, we see this within all of our supply chains, and it's quite possible for a Northern Irish firm to be trading just as importantly and in terms of value and number of consignments into the EU as it does with GB, all within the same component supply chains. And those are where the real difficulties will arise for our exporters. And I suppose the big challenge for the Northern Ireland economy as a whole is that it's those exporters that add so much value to the Northern Ireland economy. We know that businesses that trade just across the border have much higher productivity, they have higher turnover and employ more people. So those are absolutely the firms that we want to see continue to grow rather than cause barriers or create barriers or not address issues that we might be able to over these next less than 50 days. So what I'll do now is I'll just take you through, this will just be the highlights for goods changes, changes in services, impacts on people, and a little bit about the preparation levels that we see out there at the moment. So I apologise that this is quite a long list, and I'm afraid it's just for the nature of all of the changes, it's not possible to make it smaller. So what's changing with regard to goods? I suppose more generally, what's changing is that Northern Ireland firms trading across the border into Ireland will no longer have access to EU FTAs. That enables Northern Ireland firms to access the new UK-wide FTAs, which is good in many respects. But we have these supply chains that have already developed where 25% of the goods from Northern Ireland going into Irish companies alone, so not even thinking about directly into EU companies, are being traded by firms who also trade in those goods with countries with which the EU have FTAs. So there's a potential there for 25% of that value of goods going across the border. That's about $1 billion worth of goods sales from Northern Ireland into Ireland being directly impacted by no longer having access to those EU FTAs. There are potential for that to be resolved through cross-accumulation of deals in the future, assuming that the UK and the EU reach a deal. There'll also be changes, and this will take place from the 1st of January in terms of how Northern Ireland firms trading into the rest of the EU reclaim their VAT. The Northern Ireland Protocol allows for those firms to be able to reclaim their goods VAT based on the IT system that they currently use. But because services isn't included in the Northern Ireland Protocol, that same ability to use the electronic system doesn't apply to services. So it's a much slower system for claiming VAT on the services system. And it may mean that firms will very practically need to split their invoices where goods and services are involved and make adjustments to their own with invoicing and accounting systems to allow just for that change in VAT rule with regard to reclaim with the EU. There'll also be very obvious changes with regard to labelling, with CE marks, with registering your IP, not just in the EU, but also within the UK. There'll be very particular considerations with regard to logistics. The Northern Ireland Protocol does allow for obviously the free flow of goods from Northern Ireland into Ireland, and also we've been promised by the UK government a unfettered access to a certain extent between Northern Ireland and GB. But the port of exit of that good from a Northern Ireland company matters. So if a firm, for example, is assignment going to GB to the southwest of England, for example, and then the quickest route to market is via Dublin port, it will be treated differently on arrival in GB than if it had left through a Northern Ireland port. And that's just the practicalities of things. So firms really will need to consider their route to the GB market in a very practical, logistical way. There also, and associated with that is contract changes and associated Incoterms, which I hope you're familiar with, but essentially it's the terms of who takes responsibility for the goods at which point in the sale. So firms probably haven't, a lot of firms, certainly that we know that we've engaged with, will not have had a great deal of experience with Incoterms and the implications of it, because it's been relatively, it's essentially the cost of transporting the good has been the only real consideration while we were all part of the single market. But because that's changing and there might be additional costs with regard to customs, checking, paperwork, administration, suddenly those Incoterms and the terms of where the good actually changes hands will become really important, and it'll be a material consideration. If we have a no deal scenario, there will potentially be big issues for firms with regards to rules of origin. In the short term, that's not going to impact too badly on firms in Northern Ireland selling into GB in the first instance. UK government has agreed a short-term broad definition of rules of origin to allow for any good that would be legally placed on the Northern Ireland market to be able to move into GB. But depending on whether or not there's a deal, there is considerable potential for that definition of a Northern Ireland good to adjust and change in a way that might make it more onerous for firms who have significant Irish components or EU components within the product that they're selling into the GB market. So lots of changes in that space, and it potentially becomes more difficult for firms too as time passes and regulations within the GB market for their good or service adjusts and changes with regard to the new freedoms that the UK will be exercising with regard to those goods or services. It may mean for some firms, for example, that produce a product for both markets, which many firms do, that they may need to adjust and have potentially two different products in order to stay competitive in both markets, depending on how the cost of divergence impacts. So not a small impact for sure. And then specifically looking at, rather than looking at Northern Ireland to Ireland and those broader impacts, looking just at those goods imports and exports from within the UK market, there will be customs paperwork. That will be the impact of the Northern Ireland Protocol. So goods coming into Northern Ireland will potentially be subject to paperwork, but the depth and expense associated with that will depend hugely on the nature of any future deal between the UK and the EU. For example, if there's no deal, there is potentially duties on those goods to be paid coming in if they're at risk of going into the EU market. That definition of risk, as I'm sure everybody is aware, has yet to be clearly defined, and in terms of how you manage that. So again, with just 6 weeks to go, we're not sure exactly how that will be treated, and there's potential for duties to essentially have to be paid up front and then reclaimed, which is a big impact on cash flow, particularly for those very small firms that are doing a lot of this importing and exporting within their supply chains. And in addition, VAT will be applied on top of duties. So it's almost like a double cost. So there'll be the cost of the duty and the additional cost of VAT on top of the duty. Depending on the goods that people are moving in from GB, there might be SBS checks if it's an agricultural good. Not only will there be changes in the VAT rules and VAT reclaim with the EU, there will also be changes in how the VAT system works for the UK as a whole. So at the moment, for example, firms are able to move goods without charging VAT on them within their own company. If the company has, say, an office in Belfast, an office in London, or sites in London and Birmingham and Enniskillen. But that will no longer be able to move VAT free. So there will both be paperwork and expenses that need to be reclaimed on VAT with those changes. And generally, a lot of this will add up to the impacts potentially on the competitiveness of firms in Northern Ireland who trade both with the EU and with GB. And while the Internal Market Bill, and I must mention it, has been maybe promoted as addressing some of the competitiveness issues, it doesn't address all of them for sure. It puts at risk some of the benefits that are achieved through the protocol. And it also leaves whole sections of the Northern Ireland economy that are really important for competitiveness into the GB market, such as anything under the chemicals area, of the benefits of having that even playing field within the UK market. So it's definitely not a great fix as it's currently proposed. I appreciate that's an awful lot on goods, so I'll move on to services, but I will be happy to take any questions on this at the end. So looking at services, it's such an important area for us in Northern Ireland as we move into and become more of a knowledge economy. It's what we're striving to do. It produces higher value jobs, and it delivers more locally. It's very much attuned to the whole of the direction of the global economy and the introduction of new technologies. And it makes up for us almost half of the value of cross-border trade. So of that 4+ billion of value of trade going in from Northern Ireland into Ireland, 2 billion of it is services trade. It's not covered, however, in the Northern Ireland Protocol, so that creates some issues for Northern Ireland firms trading in to the rest of the EU, which is a huge market and very transportable because of the nature in which it's delivered. It particularly has issues for goods firms who also deliver services as part of their goods sale. So, for example, a manufacturing firm that sells a piece of specialised equipment into the EU, but also need to use their specialists in order to install that equipment. So that would be considered Mode 5 delivery of services, so very much part of a goods sale. Apologies, I see a spelling mistake in my slide here. But because we've talked so much in the current negotiations with regard to the impact on goods, tariffs, customs, because they're very big and tangible areas that we're used to seeing detail and trade deals on. There's been a lot less said around services, and it's a lot less tangible, which makes it all the harder for a services firm to plan and prepare for the changes that lie ahead. But some of the areas that they'll need to be aware of are with regard to changes in access to public procurement. So as we're no longer part of the single market, the ease in which we can access what are considerable public procurement opportunities within the EU changes. It also, certainly for government agencies such as ourselves, impacts on our ability to attract world-class expertise in particular areas by using EU procurement systems. But some of the big areas that we've been advising firms are in relation to data, which I see as a real particular problem because at the moment, the GDPR regulations, which we've all been working towards for a number of years now, in order to be compliant and evidence compliance, all of a sudden we'll not have potentially data adequacy with regard to GDPR, and that will make moving data or personal data of EU citizens across the border very difficult. There are some solutions to that in relation to the use of standard contractual clauses and binding contractual corporate rules for moving data within a corporation or firm on both sides of the border. But it isn't quite as simple just as that. So if we're moving data on a regular basis because of maybe we have a server or data activities being undertaken within the EU on a regular basis, we actually would need to potentially employ an EU data representative in order to do that in a legal way. So it's a big issue for sure. Mutual recognition of professional qualifications is another area where the UK is very keen to see a deal. And they've certainly made that very clear. But it's not something that has been achieved, and in the event of a no deal and a lack of data adequacy, both of those issues will impact on the ability of firms undertaking services, particularly professional services, to be able to continue to do so legally. And that maybe comes in nicely into the area of people and how that's going to change really from the 1st of January. And this takes into account a lot of the changes that are going to come into play in Northern Ireland with regard to the changing immigration policies of the UK. So first off, one of the great advantages that we have, and it is a UK-wide advantage, is the common travel area. It does mean that people throughout the UK and Ireland can move freely and work freely, and that is a real benefit to such a small economy as Northern Ireland to be able to attract people in without the burden of immigration visas and activities and the costs of those. But the new immigration policies as they've been written are going to cause difficulties for firms in Northern Ireland who are trying to attract in people from outside of the common travel area who traditionally we'd be attracting in essentially at lower wage values than maybe London or anywhere else in the southwest of England. Our average salary levels across almost all of the areas in which we operate are lower as a region. But that's compensated in some ways with the fact that we are a lower cost of living and those sorts of things. The housing prices aren't the same as they are in London by any stretch of the imaginations, for example. But the rules are based on the actual for immigration around salary. So it's going to be more difficult for firms to attract the high skill levels that they need at the salaries they can afford. And on the flip side of that, there is the lower salary, lower skills jobs that we actually need a lot of. So throughout our whole agriculture sector, for example, a lot of the seasonal workers will have a lower income, but also things like in our waste recycling systems, those are not high paid jobs, and we will no longer be able to attract people from elsewhere in the EU as we do currently to undertake those jobs. And one of the solutions had been using the Migration Advisory Committee's shortage occupation list. And we, for the very first time in 2020, managed to get, I think, 4 occupations onto a Northern Ireland only shortage occupation list that was presented by the Migration Advisory Committee very recently to the Home Office. And as a result of COVID-19, it's been rejected. So that the whole of the shortage occupation list has been put on hold currently, which means that even those shortage occupations that were low paid jobs that didn't fit within the current immigration or proposed immigration policy, they're just actually sitting on hold now. We'll not actually be able to attract them in as we'd hoped to. One of the other options is that we do have a frontier worker scheme, but it has only just been announced this week and closes within a month. So we'll be doing what we can to promote that out to firms in order to attract EU workers in who move across the border, which about 30,000 workers do, if they can actually apply for frontier worker permits at a no cost and low admin fees, really. So it'd be something that would be worthwhile firms doing. I'm just conscious of the time, so I'm going to move on to just touch on preparedness. And I suppose this is maybe in part to give some comfort that if you're feeling that in Fermanagh and Omagh businesses don't feel terribly prepared, it's quite broadly the case. We know from our All Island Business Monitor, which the results of which were just published a few weeks ago, that overall in Northern Ireland, only 9% of firms are telling us that they have preparations in place for Brexit. In Ireland, it's actually quite high, higher at 22%. And for businesses that currently already trade across the border, it's more like a third. About a third of those have preparations in place for Brexit. That being said, the impact that COVID-19 has had on the economy and on those firms has been substantial, and about 46% of those firms who have plans in place are telling us they'll need to revise them as a result of all of the changes that have taken place because of the pandemic. And we're not too far out. We only have, as I've mentioned probably several times now, about 6 weeks left until the end of the transition period. There's lots of issues that we're still waiting the detail on. We don't have the Hauliers Handbook in terms of how logistics are going to work. We don't have a lot of the detail around the systems on VAT that businesses will need to become familiar with. We don't know how goods at risk will be defined. We don't know exactly whether there's going to be a trade deal or not, whether that trade deal will be a comprehensive one, which will cover all of the sectors within which we trade, north, south, east, west, whether services will be wrapped up in that, whether there'll be data adequacy that will make the flow of information between the UK and the EU easier. We have the Trader Support Service, which we're absolutely promoting, but it isn't a catch-all for everything. It will be very specifically looking at helping Northern Ireland firms import goods from the rest of GB, because that's where the majority of the new paperwork and difficulties will lie. And that will be an educational piece primarily for Northern Ireland firms. There isn't any suggestion that the Trader Support Service is going to do all of the work. There's a lot of work for Northern Ireland firms to do in order to avail of the supports that the Trader Support Service has. We know that the Northern Ireland will also need to have an XI prefixed to their VAT and EORI numbers, but they haven't been issued yet. I feel as if it's a long and negative list, and I hate to end on this note. But I'm afraid that's where we are at the moment. What I would say is that despite what maybe sounds like a bit of doom and gloom, because there's a lot still undecided, there's lots still for businesses to do, and we know that a lot of businesses just aren't there yet. What I would say is that there's, one, they're not alone, and two, there's a lot of support and advice out there for businesses to become prepared. There's a lot of things that they can do now, despite the uncertainty and despite the short timeframes. These are simple things like getting their EORI number. They can register with, if they register with the Trader Support Service, I think by the 20th of November, they'll automatically be issued with their EORI number. So it actually makes things a lot easier for them. So, and using supports like the Brexit Advisory Service, which, as my colleague Deirdre Maguire is on the call with us today as well. And the Brexit Advisory Service can, both online, give an awful lot of information to firms about the steps that they need to go through. It can help educate them on how to manage their supply chains and their data flows. It also produces a lot of quite regular webinars that take a deep dive into issues such as logistics and VAT and services. So the key things that businesses will need to do and change. And on top of that, we actually have a voucher scheme, which offers businesses essentially one-to-one training or development or support or guidance on their preparations for Brexit. So all of which will cost the business nothing but their time, which they'll need to dedicate to this in order to continue to trade and to be competitive. So I suppose my takeaway from this for the council would be where you have the opportunity to do so, encourage your businesses to make the time now, put in the effort to be prepared, because that will hold them in good stead moving forward, regardless of the details that are still to shake out. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Kerry. Deirdre, is Deirdre giving us something, or is she in attendance just?
Deirdre's in attendance to take any specific questions with regard to the Brexit Advisory Service, which may be helpful.
Okay, well, thanks very much. Well, I'm looking, actually, I jumped the gun a wee bit too quickly there. Could I get somebody to second the minutes of the previous meeting there? Kind of jumped the gun and went into the presentation before that. I think Councillor Howard Thornton had his hand up to do that. So, Howard, is that okay?
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you, Howard. Sorry about that. I just kind of jumped on a bit. But I'll take now any questions for Kerry or Deirdre. So I'll go into that now. The first one indicating for me is Councillor Stephen Donnelly.
Thank you very much, Chair. And can I say thank you to Kerry for that presentation. It was very in-depth and informative. And, I appreciate what you said at the end of your presentation, but it does feel like anytime we do get these presentations from independent bodies, the tone does seem to be overwhelmingly negative. And indeed, I mean, even sort of suggested from the presentation, it seems the one thing that is often suggested as being a positive of Brexit is the fact that we're going to have access to these UK free trade agreements. But it does seem to me that we're just essentially replicating what we already have in the European context, where we have sort of access already to a lot of these free trade arrangements by virtue of being part of the European bloc. But I suppose just to kind of touch on your presentation, you kind of mentioned how the vast bulk of our cross-border exports, about £278 million for Mananoma, significant amount of that is from SMEs, small employers, businesses with very low workforces. And I think you did touch on it a little bit with the preparations element of the presentation, and maybe Deirdre would want to come in on this. But if you could give advice, I guess, to those small businesses operating within sort of border districts like Fermanagh, what would that advice be? Simply because, I mean, obviously at this time, there is still a lot of uncertainty. And I think that there are a lot of businesses out there who, quite frankly, just don't understand sort of what the future context and business environment is going to be that they're going to be operating in.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor. And I think those points are very well made with regard to certainly the changes that are taking place and perhaps the perceived difficulties and benefits. And it's unfortunate that often we're in a position where we are maybe saying things that sound quite negative, but the reality is that maybe in a year's time we'll be in a very different position and we'll be telling a different story, because we'll know what things look like, and businesses will know the systems that they need to work within, and businesses will adjust. I think a lot of the negativity at the moment comes from the uncertainty, and businesses don't like uncertainty. You know, it makes it hard for them to invest and to develop and grow, and as a result, maybe over the past 4 years, we've seen a period of stagnation with regard to investment, and that certainly hasn't helped the position that we're in as a result of the uncertainty. But in terms of the advice to SMEs, now I will ask my colleague Deirdre to come in here, but I suppose the very first thing that I would say to businesses would be to understand their trade flow, understand their supply chain, not just where they buy something from or who they sell it to, but where their markets are, where are they getting the goods from or the services from, and where are they selling them on to. So taking your supply chain just that little bit further back, and that's a very simple thing to do. It can be as simple as making a phone call to your buyers and suppliers just to understand what their preparations for Brexit are. And even for a very small firm, that isn't something that needs to be complicated. They don't need to understand rules or new systems in order to do it. They just need to understand what they buy and sell better in order to make that first step in being prepared. And Deirdre has had a lot of experience in giving firms advice in terms of the practical things that they can do now. So I'm actually going to pass over to Deirdre because she'll say it better than I can.
I doubt that, Kerry, very much. I'll not elaborate too long because you've kind of covered most of it off. But just from my experience, there are two sides to Brexit. One is the level of detail and the economic impact, and also then obviously you go down to the layers when I'm speaking to businesses day in day out. A business won't know what questions to ask because they're too busy getting on with it. They won't know what a commodity code is. Where do I get it? What's my EORI number? So my best advice to anybody or any business that hasn't planned is, just one step at a time. Do one thing a day. If one thing is register for trader support, do that one thing. If another thing is to go to a webinar, do that one thing. And, literally don't be afraid that it is work. There's work involved here, no matter what happens, whether there is a free trade agreement or not. You'll have to put in a bit of work as a business, and it's not welcomed with COVID, understanding all of those things, but it will be necessary. You can go to the government.uk. They have a website, it's Transition, and I would recommend that any business or anybody should absolutely subscribe to that. And you get updates every day, and all of the key information is being posted almost daily there. Well, it is daily. And the other thing is, if you have a business and you've already planned, go back in and check it all again, because COVID has changed margins, price margins, supply chains, everything's changed. And so that's the practical advice. That's only a snippet of practical advice. I'm conscious we've been here for a while, but that's how I would approach it when I'm speaking to businesses.
Thanks, Deirdre.
Okay, Stephen. The next hand up I have is from Councillor Deehan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Kerry, for your very succinct and comprehensive presentation. Certainly a lot to think about. I want to thank Intertrade Ireland for all the work and all the benefits that they have brought to us over the years since their formation. It certainly is a very worrying time to be in business, and I suppose it remains to be seen how things will work out over the next number of weeks. My question really relates to access to EU procurement. Now, I would have thought that is a huge disadvantage for all of our firms that are providing services, and also then to inform us that as yet there is no mutual recognition of professional qualifications, because I imagine that takes some time to get that in place. So my question is, and maybe Deirdre could answer this, do we have any information or data as to how many of our local firms compete successfully for big EU projects? Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Joe.
Hello, Josephine. In terms of the data, that's not I would not have that kind of information. We do have tendering and procurement within Intertrade Ireland, and Kerry, I'll refer to you when I'm finished speaking here. But in terms of procurement, we have not seen, so I can tell you what I'm seeing from the Brexit Advisory Service and the businesses who have approached us, and there have been over 2,000 to date. Not a lot of them are asking about public procurement, and the main reason for that is so they will have access to procurement, only it's going to be different. And so until something tangible comes out that makes that better, there's very little that they can really do at this moment in time. I don't have data, and it's not really what I would be. I would never talk about public procurement data, but certainly if it was something that you wanted us to maybe see if we could delve into, we could. Kerry, I'm not sure, would we have procurement data?
No, so we wouldn't have access to the EU system. That being said, the Department for the Economy may have if we made a special request, although I'm not entirely sure that the Department for the Economy even would have access to that. And if they did, it would only be for the next 6 weeks. In terms of, you mentioned mutual, well, firstly, if we talk about the public procurement access, I would note that there is potential for each country to consider the UK's access to their public procurement system separately once the UK leaves. So we might be hopeful that Ireland, as our nearest neighbour, who would attract certainly an awful lot of public procurement applications from Northern Ireland.
Sorry, can I speak on a point of order? As the Sinn Féin leader, I have to take serious exception to Ireland being described as our nearest neighbour. The Good Friday Agreement recognises our right to...
Barry, can you just let the girl finish off and then...
I have to say, within our group, there's serious disconcert feeling about Ireland being described as our nearest neighbour. If I don't state that, there's an even bigger problem. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Barry. Carry on, Kerry.
Look, Councillor, you're quite all right, sort of like raising that as an issue, and I don't mean it in terms of any disrespect. As a girl from sort of like County Down, I might describe my nearest county as my nearest neighbour. I mean it in that context, just geographically rather than politically. Certainly no disrespect intended. That being said, the Irish government will have access to the ability to state whether or not a UK firm, which Northern Ireland will be included in that as it will be outside of the single market, whether they have access to their public procurement with the same ease that we currently do. And certainly from discussions with Minister Coveney, we'd be hopeful that that's something that we can achieve for Northern Ireland, but it's not something that currently is at the forefront of discussions because of the nature of the current negotiations. In addition, we talked about, the Councillor Dean mentioned mutual recognition of professional qualifications. I would just like to say on that point that it could be some time before the regulatory bodies are able to address this, but there are pathways to addressing it through essentially regulatory bodies in both Ireland and the UK coming to bilateral agreements with regard to professional qualifications, but and that's assuming that it isn't achieved through the current negotiations. I hope that's helpful.
Chair, if I could just a supplementary, Chair, please, if I may, quickly.
Go for it, Joe. Very quick.
Thank you, Chair. No, Chair, I see this as being a big problem because we all know of many firms, particularly in architecture, construction, building services, who do the majority of their business in the Republic of Ireland. And, you know, if there are, and we all know that all the big value contracts must go through EU procurement. So I see this as a major issue, and one which I'm sorry to hear doesn't seem to be high on the list of priorities for negotiations. So that's perhaps something that we as a council might be able to lobby on. But thank you very much for your answers, ladies. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for that, Joe. The next hand up I have is Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. Just on the figures that was given about from Annanoma Council area, sending 270 million approximately south in business. Have you any idea of what the Fermanagh District Council area would send over to Britain? Is there figures available for that? And just one other thing, when I'm not sure, was it Kerry or the other lady that said that that in a year's time things could look more positive. On the flip side of that, in a year's time, things could look even far worse than they look now. So just to point that out. So just on that first question, have we any figures on that?
Thank you very much, Councillor. Yes, you're absolutely right. Perhaps a positive outlook is that things will look a lot better in a year's time when we know what the rules of play are. But equally, with all of the difficulties that we face, there's certainly for individual firms a lot of challenges ahead. What I would say though is that all of the data that we have shows that actually firms here on the island of Ireland are very entrepreneurial and that in itself holds us in good stead in terms of their natural desire and ability to adjust to changing market circumstances. On the point of the 278 million, sort of my apologies if that wasn't clear. Sorry, that's the Fermanagh and Oma's district councils exports entirely from Northern Ireland. So that will encompass both, well, not both. It will encompass exports to Ireland, to GB, and to the rest of the EU and rest of the world. That's the total value of exports from Fermanagh and Oma. The proportion of that goes south and the portion of it that goes to GB isn't available from the publicly produced data, but NISRA would have it, I think, at a more detailed level, just by the nature of the way that they collect the BASIS survey results. So that would be available, but it would be directly through NISRA.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Councillor Siobhan Curry.
Gurmagada Caroline, thank you very much, Kerry, for your presentation. Thanks, Deirdre, for joining us. Just a couple of questions. Kerry, can you clarify again? I don't know if I understood it correctly. Will businesses from the north be ineligible for FTAs, or is that just still up in the air? And the other thing, I was just wondering, on the Frontier Worker Permit Scheme, in the slide it said it's opening on the 10th of December, but then you had said it's open now. Is that for a set period of time? And does that actually affect, is that something that workers here in this area have to apply for? Is it workers travelling both directions to work? Because we would have a lot of workers actually in our own council who that would apply to. So just a little bit more information on that, if you don't mind, or if you could explain it just a wee bit more. Thank you.
No, not at all, Councillor. I'd be happy to do so. So in terms of the FTAs, so if you think of it as two different sets of the FTAs, there's the ones that we currently have access to until the end of the year, which are the EU FTAs. The UK has been working to essentially mirror those, and where possible to make changes to those with all of the countries that the EU currently have FTAs with. Not all of those are in place yet, and we don't know which UK FTAs will be in place between now and the end of the year. Recently, there was a new FTA signed with Japan, for example, which is different from the FTA that the EU has with Japan. So it was much more of a tailored one. And there's some issues that arise with that. Maybe as an aside, with regard to the cross accumulation that will arise between sort of like the goods that are being traded within the UK's and the EU's FTAs with that country, and that will have an impact on our rules of origin. But that's maybe sort of like in a bit too much detail. But for a Northern Ireland firm, which was your question, currently we access EU FTAs. At the end of the transition period, we will only have access to the UK's FTAs that are in place. Certainly the push that we are encouraging is that because the Northern Ireland goods are remaining aligned with EU regulations, that in theory there should be no reason why we don't have access to EU FTAs if we're able to sell into the rest of the EU. That's again something that we've raised with the Taoiseach. It's something that we've raised on numerous occasions. Actually, quite recently at our event with Minister Coveney on the 3rd of November, it was raised again. And we were encouraged that the Minister is certainly making those same arguments himself with the rest of the EU. So potentially things will change on that front and we will have access to EU FTAs. But currently, as the rules stand, as the Northern Ireland Protocol stands, as the current state of play with regard to the negotiations between the UK and the EU stand, Northern Ireland firms will no longer have access to EU FTAs at the end of the transition period. So hopefully that's clear on that one. With regard to the Frontier Worker Scheme, it is, I think it's open now, and the closing, sorry if my slide said something different. So it's only open for a 4-week period. So businesses have until the 10th of December, it's my understanding, in order to apply in order to have those forms processed by the end of the transition period. So it's only open for a 4-week period.
Well, okay, Siobhan?
Well, Paul, if I could just, Carrie, will that be all workers coming from the south, north, or the north, south, or both?
Sorry, Councillor, you did ask that. I should have said. So that is very specifically. Bear in mind that the common travel area means that any citizens of Ireland and the UK don't need to apply for any of these schemes or frontier worker schemes or permits or anything. That our right to work is clear. This will be very specifically for EU workers currently living in Ireland coming into Northern Ireland to work. So it will be the south-north frontier worker to which that frontier worker scheme will apply.
Okay, thank you. It's very worrying, isn't it, that such a short time scale is involved here? I think that, has that just opened today, Kerry? Or I know it wasn't, I don't think it was open last week, was it?
It wasn't open last week. It's just opened, I think it might have been yesterday or possibly over the weekend. It's literally only been a few days.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thanks again. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Kerry. Would you mind if I just added something there? Just Kerry, on the frontier worker, just if you're looking for a little bit of practical advice and information as to what everything means, Intertrade Ireland have a website. I can share the information after with you, and it gives you lots and lots of information about what a frontier worker is, what the schemes are, when the dates are, what they're open, when they're closed, what a sponsorship license means, what the common travel area means, and it's actually really, really good, simple, straightforward information, and we'd be happy to share that.
Thanks, Deirdre.
Thank you, Siobhan. Next hand I have up is Councillor Diane Armstrong.
Thank you, and Kerry, thank you both for a really, really interesting presentation. It really, I think I put my hands up like a lot of small businesses that you keep putting off what you need to do in preparation. But bearing in mind that that in Fermanagh and Omagh, really, we have so many micro businesses, there's more pressure, obviously, on the businesses to comply here. I know that. I just want to ask, is it necessary you have to buy specialist software to comply, to be able to submit your returns? On the point of the EORI, the Economic Operator Registration and ID number, in our case, it has come from HM Revenue and Customs because it shows your business has traded with goods with the EU. So that has come automatically. And I think, there is a lot of information from HM Revenue and Customs that I'm finding if you just work your way through it, it's there. The registration is there. So it's just a matter of getting your head down and doing it, But I'm also, another question is, if one of your suppliers is in the Republic of Ireland and they also have a depot, say in the north in Belfast, is it more advantageous to buy off their depot in Belfast than to, it obviously will incur higher costs. Is it more advantageous to do that or to continue to trade cross-border?
Well, if I can just, thank you very much for that, Councillor. There's some really good questions. I'd just like to pick up on that very last one when you're talking about trade in goods across the border. There's going to be no additional costs. There's going to be no additional paperwork. That's the point of the Northern Ireland Protocol. So when we're talking about goods that are, an Irish good moving into Northern Ireland and vice versa, there won't be additional costs for the firm, so it shouldn't impact it. The difficulties that will arise is when those goods are part of, either have components come from outside, or indeed are becoming a component into GB. So it's that off-island supply chains that will literally impact on the movement of goods across the border because of any future free trade agreement arrangements or indeed a no-deal scenario. So one would hope that if a good doesn't have any GB components and hasn't been sold on into GB, that that isn't going to be an issue if it's an Irish good coming into Northern Ireland or vice versa.
Okay, good. Okay.
Is that okay? Is that clear? Just
yeah.
And
I'll
when we
stick to
look
what
at
I do.
opportunities.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I was
just
going
go.
to leave that for someone else. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Kerry.
Thank you, Councillor. And what I would say is when we think about opportunities, that is one of the opportunities that Northern Ireland has that makes it more competitive than some of its of the businesses in GB who will necessarily be incurring additional charges, whether it just be for paperwork, even if they are tariff-free, moving goods into and out of the EU. That isn't something that a Northern Ireland firm producing a Northern Ireland good by any definition, which may change, into the EU won't have those additional cost burdens. So definitely, I suppose a positive in a negative story if that's how things are coming across. So my apologies for that. You mentioned sort of like additional software. There shouldn't be considerable costs associated with additional software. Because a lot of it will be, any additional software will be government-based software. So for example, software engaging with the customs and excise system, and that should be made available for free by the government. That being said, the cost will be with regard to time for employees to become familiar with that system and train up on that system. But I can't think of any particular software that businesses will need to buy that will have that will be produced by a commercial company. Am I right in thinking that, Deirdre?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So, Kerry, the Trader Support Service will cover all of that for software for customs. However, where it might come into play is if the business has decided also to do some element of the processing themselves, and some businesses have chosen to do that, and that's where you would need software. So there are two pieces of software. I think Chief is one of them, but that would all be provided via the Trader Support Service. And then if there's software with the VAT, that has yet to be. We don't have any details of anything else there. So the only thing I can think of where that would apply would be if a business has chosen to do their own customs paperwork, and then you would have to get your own software.
Okay, lovely. That's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Diana. Next hand up, I have Councillor John McCloughery.
Thank you for the presentation. Obviously, coming from an agricultural background, most of the dairy farmers around me export their milk goes across the border to be processed, and the group of farmers I work along with in my sheep enterprise, they all go to Meath. You're talking about components coming from Northern Ireland. Well, that's raw materials going across, but that's then processed there and it's made into something else. It's either cheese or butter, dried milk, other milk-based products, and the lamb then can be processed as well to go on to other destinations, both GB and wider Europe, and sometimes on even into the world market. At what stage is that going to affect them? Will it affect if the processors are going to incur extra costs? Then that's going to come back down the chain to the producer, who's going to have their price for their raw material cut. So at what stage will that become something that will be enforced, or does it still just remain a product, or does it become part of a product?
Yeah, so Councillor, thank you very much for that. And agriculture absolutely is one of those areas that we've been most concerned with from the very beginning because of the high value and volume of production on the island of Ireland that is within these integrated supply chains. That this fields don't really know too many boundaries in and around the border counties. It's farms straddling either side of it. And you mentioned milk production there, as well as sheep production. And what I would say is the big concern that we would have with regard to milk, which makes up a high volume of cross-border trade, is that access to EU FTAs, because a lot of the milk that goes across the border to get processed actually accesses very specifically the free trade agreement that the EU has with China, because it gets processed into dry powder and becomes part of baby formula. That's something that the rules of origin impact of no longer accepting Northern Ireland goods into EU FTAs will really impact. And that's how it is currently. We are, as I mentioned, hopeful that an agreement will be made distinctly on that in terms of Northern Ireland access into EU FTAs, but currently there is not one. And very clearly, Northern Ireland will be accessing UK FTAs, which may well include an agreement around powdered milk into China, but it will not. That won't fix our supply chain problem, which is currently an existing supply chain from Northern Ireland into Ireland that goes on into the EU FTAs, not a UK one. You mentioned also sort of like sheep and moving sheep north and south and the processing of that. Again, the Northern Ireland Protocol allows for, essentially because we're in the north, remaining aligned with EU regulations with regard to all agri-food produce, we can freely move that product into Ireland for onward selling, even if it becomes processed into cheese or wool or different meat products. That's the benefit of the Northern Ireland Protocol. It can move freely into the EU and into the EU, and also as part of the UK. We are relatively, in an unfettered way, able to move that Northern Ireland sheep produce into GB. The difficulties will arise again if those produce become part of EU FTAs, or indeed in terms of how processing will be considered in any future rules of origin with regard to the GB market. And that's something which isn't clear at the moment, and will depend on whether or not we have a free trade agreement between the UK and the EU. Sorry, that isn't a particularly concise answer. I hope it's helpful.
Sorry, I just had one other thing I wanted to add there as well, because I'm very afraid the SPS checks as well. So depending on where the product is coming from, so if it interacts with GB in any way, in any of the chain, there is potential for SPS checks. You're probably aware of that, but
yeah,
you're
sort of confirming some of my fears. So thank you.
Thanks for that, John. Next question we have is Councillor John Coyle.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks to the ladies for giving us the presentation. It's very good. No, John kind of stole me thunder there, because I'm from a farming background as well. So I live on the border. I'm near Ballick, so you know, I know the great work that Intertrade Ireland does and promoting that, but a lot of farmers do farm on both sides of, you know, the border in Fermanagh, Donegal, Cavan, Leitrim, Monaghan, you know. So I know there's probably, we don't know, that is what we're getting this past, you know, number of months, year, that there is, we have no certainty of what is coming. I know for my own farm business, I do have my ERI number because it was sent out, or our accountants are up to speed. But do you think there's going to be regulations, like north-south? Because we have a lot of beef animals that come from the south to be processed in the north. Also, like pork, comes this way. And as John had said, lamb going to meat processing plants. But we have, on an island of Ireland, we have had always promoted our beef, our lamb, our pork as, an all-Ireland product because we aligned our processes. And I know that a majority of farmers in Fermanagh and Omagh will not be diverging from them rules because, we know what kind of standard, people expect. And we have the best quality beef, pork, lamb and chicken, etc. Anywhere, and we can stand up against that. But I do feel that farmers, do you think that, those kind of businesses, what should we be doing, for to get ourselves ready? I fully support SMEs, industrial, small and medium enterprises and everything else, and they have to be supported. But I just was asking about farming. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll actually just say something very briefly on this, Councillor Coyle, and then I'll pass over to my colleague Deirdre. I would just say that, reiterate the message that Northern Ireland is staying aligned with EU regulations. So where your trade north and south on the island of Ireland, within your farming business exists, and where it doesn't interact with the UK market, which is outside of the EU, then you'll probably not feel a considerable change depending on the length and breadth of your supply chain. So in terms of, where your feed's coming from and those sorts of things. But I'll pass over to Deirdre, but to maybe answer more fully on that one.
Yeah, no, sorry, it really only struck me there, I suppose. So the cross-border trader is okay. Okay, so if it's not going anywhere other than cross-border, vice versa, there won't be any issues in that one. The only area that I would say that you would need to pay attention to now is, if you've got your EORI number, you're going to need your commodity codes for your product as well. But I would be saying it's going to be important then you have a look at your labelling, and it might be that you have to put a couple of extra things on it, like an NI, sort of UK NI or a CE, CEU, it depends, but potentially NI will need to go on your labels. So that was just the one thing that I would say practically you could do. And I know DAERA have some information as well on their website about it. And if you want, we can see if we can get you some links to send on to you.
Yeah, that'd be perfect. Can I just supplementary, Paul? We fully support the protocol, and it needs to be implemented fully. But breeding stock, maybe that comes from Scotland or England at major sales. What do you see that will be happening, at the ports or whatever? Will they have to be quarantined? Will there be extra paperwork to bring a live animal for breeding purposes into into the north?
So again, I'm happy to mention that Councillor and Deirdre, if there are some additional points that you want to come in on, that would be helpful. But there will be checks at the border, which will be between GB and Northern Ireland for live animals coming into Northern Ireland. So if you're importing breeding stock from Scotland as part of GB, there will be checks and customs at the border with special SBS checks for those goods, potentially requiring veterinary certification alongside those. So with regard to the time that will be spent on that, I couldn't guesstimate that, in part because those facilities have yet to be built, but also because it's not clear exactly how deep they will be, and that will be dependent on the future UK-EU deal. But there will be checks on the border from goods, particularly livestock, coming from Scotland into Northern Ireland.
Thanks for that, Curry. Is that okay, John?
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Okay, next hand up I have is Councillor Stephen McCann.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and to Kerry and Deirdre, thanks for coming along this evening and fielding our questions. On a personal basis, I believe Brexit will be very bad for Ireland, and that's across the 32 counties. I believe it's going to present many challenges in the very near future, and will make getting business done and getting things moving along more difficult and more expensive for business people. Now, from an Intertrade Ireland point of view, we've heard about the many challenges that Brexit presents, but do you see any opportunities post-Brexit? And I've asked that question of the many other people who've came along to the committee and made presentations as well, folks, so it's not just yourselves. And we hear about the challenges, and some out there would purport that would be opportunities. In the aftermath of Brexit, I don't agree there would be. But from yourselves, do you see any potential opportunities post-Brexit?
Well,
Deirdre, do you want to mention those? I have something in mind, but
yeah, I'm happy to say that from my viewpoint, with every negative, there will always be positives. Okay, so there will always be an opportunity, and for a business to find that opportunity, you need to know your risks right now. So you need to know what's happening in the landscape. And so I would say, if you are a business and you've planned for Brexit and you know where all your risks are and you've mitigated them, then you might find opportunity in the supply chain. You might find opportunity in operating in both jurisdictions, for example, and you might find opportunity because right now almost every business will be doing a supply chain review, and a lot of businesses are looking for alternative suppliers, almost to have a double whammy of suppliers just in case. And there's bound to be opportunity there. It just depends what your sector is, who your suppliers are, and how close you are aligned to them. So.
And I would add, thank you for that, Deirdre. I would add, just on a quick calculation there, based on the proportion of north-south trade as opposed to GB to Ireland trade. And it's something in the region of GB to Ireland, sort of imports into Ireland, worth about 40 billion. Where there are additional costs for firms in Ireland bringing in goods from GB, which are currently their preferred supply chain route. Maybe it's a little bit cheaper because of the way things are being produced at a larger factory or whatever. There's opportunities for sure for Northern Ireland firms to become part of those supply chains because we have that free access into the Irish EU market. And so if I was a firm, I would be seeking out those opportunities to strengthen and grow my all-island supply chains and to, I suppose, grow business from where business is being lost in other trade flows. So certainly for firms that seek out the opportunities, there will be them. But I would also add that what we do now in terms of what businesses are currently producing, selling, services they're currently delivering, it's constantly changing. That's kind of like the one truism is that we're in a constant state of flux. The needs of the market as a result of COVID-19 are very different now than they were a year ago. The needs of the market in relation to new technologies will be very different, and we'll have entirely new supply chains than we currently have, just because the world's changing. The growth and the importance of the green recovery, low carbon technologies, and the bioeconomy, advanced manufacturing, all these things are taking off at the moment, and we've got a lot of skills in that space within Northern Ireland and lots of opportunities for new businesses to grow and to develop in both of the markets in terms of the EU and GB. So, the impact that it's going to have now is going to be, I say things are going to be different in a year's time. They'll also be very different in 2 years' time and 3 years' time. It'll be different firms taking different advantages and opportunities as they arise, and they constantly will arise.
Thanks for that, Kerry. Is that okay, Stephen?
Yeah, just to make just a final point, and thanks for your answer, folks. What I heard there was, I suppose, there might be opportunities, and there's bound to be opportunities if you go out and look for them. However, the people I'm talking to from along the border in terms of tourism industry people from the agri-foods, people from haulage and distribution are crying out, saying that they are facing huge challenges, possibly facing the wall due to the expense. So I just wanted to see, was there any opportunities that could be say, well, listen, this is an opportunity, but I'll leave it at that. Thanks, folks. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Stephen. Next hand up I have is Councillor Donald Coffey.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Kerry and Deirdre. I just wanted to start off by saying that I understand the difficulties that Intertrade Ireland has to operate under with nomenclature as a result of Stormont policy. So I understand why you use the terms that you use, and I hope maybe others would understand that as well. In regard to, I think your presentation has been excellent, as usual. I think Intertrade Ireland is one of the best organisations on this island in terms of its efficacy and my long experience working with them in many ways. And I think your last answer was actually very incisive, and I do believe that what you're talking about there is the language of the future. And I think it reflects the inherent skills base that exists within Northern Ireland that I think could really propel us to import substitution opportunities and also opportunities around supply chain development on an all-Ireland basis. There are consequences to that, but I think that's the way the economy is developing, and it will continue to develop in that way as a result of decisions made in London. I think also I just want to say I think there will be a deal. I think that Europe and Brussels and London wants a deal. It's as well as that. I think the information everyone's hearing is that the main stopping point is fishermen's rights in Britain, and I don't for an instant believe that the Tories won't sacrifice fishermen's rights to achieve a deal with Europe. So I think that there will be one, but that will not resolve all the problems we face, obviously. There's a few questions, really, more for my own erudition than anything else. One is we will remain within the customs union of the UK. I'm just wondering about the free trade agreements that are conducted by the UK in the future outside of the EU. Will there be restrictions on the goods that are imported, say, from China, Japan, wherever else they conduct these trade deals with, if they fail to meet EU regulatory standards? So my question really is that will that accelerate the declension between the northern economy and that in GB? And also it would probably raise relative consumer prices. So inflation seems to be consistent, I'm seeing here, really. The second question is almost the reverse of that, which is that we will be excluded from the EU customs union, but they will have free trade agreements that will not be matched by the UK. Will there be controls on third-party goods entering the Republic of Ireland, then subsequently entering the Northern Ireland economy, and will not create something of a north-south barrier? The other question related to that is the long-term significance of the Northern Ireland Protocol, because I understand it only deals with extant EU regulations. It doesn't future-proof them. So it means that if EU brings in new regulations that impede north-south trade, then it becomes dependent on the veto installment, whether or not that will apply to Northern Ireland. So therefore, again, I would see the fruit and the seed of future north-south trade barriers. My main concern is really that you end up with both a north-south and an east-west border over time. And finally, really about the EU VAT rate, which I believe is going to apply on goods in Northern Ireland. That is higher than the EU VAT rate the UK VAT rate, and therefore there will be an inflationary pressure from that, and equally an inflationary pressure from a reorientation of the trade and supply chains, in particular around retail, north-south as opposed to east-west. And again, I see inflation arising from that. So overall, I'm just wondering if you see the same things. A, an inflationary pressure in terms of prices, whereas our wages are tied to UK standards. B, a definite development of an east-west border in relation not just to SBS, but also maybe the free trade agreements the UK conclude, and then potentially the seed of a north-south border on additional areas not covered by the Northern Ireland Protocol. But that's just some questions. Thanks very much for your presentation.
Thanks, Donald.
Thank you very much, Councillor. You're clearly very across these issues, because absolutely we see a lot of these issues arising from discussions that we're having in Belfast, Dublin, and London. So I'll try and go through these sort of like logically, and Deirdre, feel free to jump in if I'm missing anything here. So you mentioned initially sort of like the rest of world trade deals and whether that would impact on goods coming into Northern Ireland. So, for example, if the UK does a deal with China, those goods coming in, those goods will still be able to come into Northern Ireland for sure, as long as they are not at risk of going into the EU. So, in the same as a good produced in GB at present, the same rules will apply. Does it meet the regulations to move into the EU market? And if it's a non-permitted good, it'll be a non-permitted good and it won't be allowed to move into that market for sale on the EU market. But we'll still have the full access to those goods in Northern Ireland in the same way that they'll be available in Wales, Scotland, or England. You mentioned sort of like the potential for rising consumer prices. And yes, I do see that coming through already. If you look at the announcement from Sainsbury's with regard to even the availability of goods, it's about consumer choice as well as price. So these are factors that we are struggling with at the moment, and I know that both the First and Deputy First Minister have written to the EU in this regard, but it's an issue that the departments in the north have been well aware of for some time and have been informing UK government about it for some time. We also have some excellent retail representative organisations in Northern Ireland who equally have been placing a lot of pressure on London and Brussels in this regard in order to protect consumer rights in relation to both availability of goods and the potential for inflationary pressure. How that all plays out in the end, a lot of that does depend on the nature of any future deals. You mentioned as well the future North-South mechanisms for as things change, particularly in the EU. And I do believe that the Northern Ireland Protocol allows for a committee based in the North-South Ministerial Council to address these issues as they arise. So there is a mechanism in place for dealing with that. Part of the additional pressure, however, will be the mechanism within the Northern Ireland Protocol to allow for, I suppose, rediscovery or negotiation of our position in some ways in Northern Ireland in relation to the protocol, which creates even greater uncertainty or just the long-term envisage of uncertainty for businesses that do establish important or strategically important supply chains on the island of Ireland. So there are a number of issues wrapped up in that, which will be an issue. You mentioned the EU VAT rate as well. Yes, so for goods trade, we'll be aligning in the north with the EU VAT rate. There is within the Northern Ireland Protocol the option for the UK government to adjust VAT rates in Northern Ireland particularly on certain goods, in order to alleviate some of that pressure in Northern Ireland firms, but they haven't taken up that opportunity as of yet. And I know no more about that in terms of whether that's their intention to do so. So yes, I do think there's the high likelihood of inflationary pressure. There will be implications in terms of access to the varying EU FTAs, but Northern Ireland will benefit in terms of the UK's FTAs for sure. That we'll not miss out on both, but potentially we might gain both if we stay aligned to EU regulations. There is still the space, maybe not in these negotiations, but certainly maybe outside of these by bilateral agreement for us to access the EU FTAs. That's certainly my hope.
Thanks for that, Kerry.
Thank you, Kerry.
Thank you, Donald. The final question I have tonight is from Councillor Anthony Feely. Anthony?
Thank you, Healy. And it's not really a question, Paul, it's more just a comment. And I'd just like to thank the ladies for their presentation there. It was very interesting and I enjoyed it. I'm glad to hear the answers about agriculture there, being a farmer myself, and glad to hear them referring to the island of Ireland more so than our neighbours in Ireland. So, and I can really see no positives at all out of Brexit. Maybe the only kind of thing being a farmer here on the border, that smuggling could be back, like, and I wouldn't really condone that, but I just said that we would have smuggling going on again. I just wanted, and I enjoyed the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Feely. I have one final hand I'll permit there. Councillor Sean Clark.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose I want to raise slightly about slightly business. It's a number of people who travel on a daily basis across the border on short-term contracts, like carpenters, brickies and the rest of it. Also their ability to tender for work in the south now, which they were. Will there be any changes there? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure if it was the system this end or if it was elsewhere, but I didn't catch that last question, that whole segment from Councillor Clark. My apologies.
Yeah.
Sean, do you want to repeat it there? Sean, you're muted. Do you want to repeat that question?
I could update on that if you want there. I think, yeah. So my understanding was there were two things about that question. One was the workers who cross the border and to their ability to keep their employment, which are subject to tenders and procurement. Okay, so the first part of that is the common travel area, and that means that if you're born in Ireland, that you will be able to cross the border without any issues. So that will be unfettered. There'll be no issues with that. In terms of the public procurement is considered outside of trade and goods, so there will be issues, and we did talk about that earlier on. So for public procurement, depending on where you're based and dependent on the type of contract, you will, in Northern Ireland, will have access to the European procurement tenders, but it's not going to be the same. And again, we wait for information on that from the free trade agreement, if there is one, what it will be and how far it will go. But I think for the most part, that issue of crossing the border to do work from north, south, south, north, it shouldn't be as big as an issue as you think. Kerry, what do you, yeah?
Yeah, no, I'd concur. For some with either Irish or UK citizenship, there should be no issues at all with movement for work. And in fact, refusal to continue that would be there would be legal grounds with regard to that, because it would be outside of the agreements that are currently in place. With regard to access to public procurement, a lot of that's going to depend, as Deirdre mentions, on the final deal, access to services, and potentially individual countries' decisions with regard to recognition of the UK in their broader procurement contracts, and how they advertise and how businesses access those opportunities. So still a lot to really to fall into place on that one.
Okay, did that answer your question? Councillor Clark?
Hold on. Yeah, I think I said okay. Sorry, we're having problems here.
No problem,
Okay.
Sean. I think we got it anyway. I think we've got the gist. Thank you for that. And there's no more questions, nobody else indicating. So thank you to Deirdre and Kerry for your presentation this evening. It was extremely informative and very enlightening and frightening just how close things are with so many unanswered questions. But I thank you most sincerely on behalf of Fermanagh Council for giving up your time to answer the members' questions tonight, because tonight was very beneficial. And thank you so much again for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for great questions as well. And we, as always, we would offer up the opportunity for any follow-up that any of the councillors have, or indeed anyone that they engage with. Do contact us, the IntertradeIreland.com. We're here to help. That's exactly what we're here for. So more than happy to give of our time. Thanks again.
Thank you, Kerry. You didn't feel too much on the spot, so thank you.
Not at all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So moving on, the next item is item number 6.
Sorry, Chair.
Yes, Joe?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Well, that was a really valuable presentation. But just coming out of that presentation, Chair, I wonder if I could make a proposal, please. And it's just really in relation to ensuring that Northern Ireland companies do continue to have the opportunity to tender for major EU projects, particularly projects in the Republic of Ireland, as they're currently doing. So I would propose that we write a letter to Minister Dodd's Department for the Economy in Northern Ireland, and also to An Taoiseach, Minister Coveney, highlighting the benefit to Northern Ireland companies of being able to participate in EU procurement, and also to successfully compete for major projects, particularly in the Republic of Ireland, and express our concern that these arrangements be maintained beyond the transition period, and request urgent prioritisation and finalisation of negotiations and agreements, and necessary legislation to ensure that these arrangements are maintained. Thank you, Chair.
No problem. Next hand I have up is Councillor Bernice Swift.
Yes, just to second Councillor Deehan's proposal, very well thought out proposal. We have to seek the opportunities, and just to make sure, Josephine, it is the Taoiseach that you're sending the letter to, as well as Minister Dodds, yes?
Yes, absolutely, because he is the one who is heading up the negotiations, Chair.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Bernice. Okay, Sean Clark, your hand was up, but I take it that was to second Joe's proposal. Sean, do you want to come in?
Yeah, you have it one.
Okay, thanks very much. Moving on then, we're going to item 6 to receive a verbal update on the current position in respect of Brexit. I think, Alison, did you inform me that there wasn't much to report back on things?
No, well, Chair, just to, I suppose to summarise, as was indicated in from colleagues there from Intertrade, there's really very little more to update other than since our last meeting. The sticking blocks that had previously been identified, specifically with regard to what are being termed as the level playing field provisions and fisheries, remain the main obstacles. There's obviously more activity in relation to the UK Internal Market Bill, and that is going back to the House of Lords for the next stage of scrutiny. But in terms of local arrangements, Chair, within Northern Ireland, we have heard nothing further, not since our last meeting.
Thank you for that, Alison. And the next item 7, correspondence. We have nothing back, unfortunately, for tonight's meeting. So we'll proceed on. Councillor Siobhan Curry.
Yes, Gormagad Keherly, I was sorry, I'm a bit late coming in here. I was just trying to look back through the minutes. There was an event, I think, that our council, there was a good deal of discussion around it the last time around who should attend or that, but I was just wondering if there was any update from that. I think it was in the first week of the month, that may have been that, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, that's correct.
No, that's correct. It was the executive committee, and I suppose the transcripts and the videos are available on Hansard on the Assembly website. There were 5 councils at the first session, Chair, 6 the following week, which would have been last week. The delegation, where the members, of the committee were interested specifically on funding implications for the council, engagement, and our view in terms of potential impacts. There was roughly 5 minutes of a presentation, and the rest was questions, but I certainly think it was well received. But my understanding is the committee is going to be doing quite a bit of further engagement work across civic society and again with central government, but we have heard nothing since the meeting other than an acknowledgement of attendance, Chair. But all of the documentation is available on the Assembly website.
Okay, Siobhan.
Yes, thank you, Gormagad.
No problem. Moving on then, the next item is any urgent relevant business. I've one indication from Councillor McAleer who wishes to raise something. So, Emmett, do you want to go on ahead there?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I suppose it's ironic enough that at the Brexit Committee and the Leaving Committee that I'd raised the issue just of Mickey Hart and his ending of his tenure, and indeed the end of a era for County Tyrone and most notably our senior Gaelic footballers, but indeed Mick at the charge at the charge of the ship for 30 years now, and it's hard to believe what he has achieved during that time. I know as a keen fan myself, I remember vividly being there in Croke Park in 1986 and probably even more acutely in 1995, and the pain of losing an All-Ireland final is something that really does sting and does live with you. But following his appointment at the end of 2002, we did reach the promised land, and I suppose we'd been knocking on heaven's door for so long that when Mickey Hart came on board, we finally kicked that door down. And amazingly, for a county that had never won the All-Ireland, we went on to win it 3 times over the next number of years. I think it's worth acknowledging the sporting achievements, but also the joy and the pride that he has instilled in this county through sporting endeavours. I know the Tyrone team and Mickey Hart and his family have been touched by many tragedies, and you know, it's a credit to him and it's a credit to those around him that they're still standing after all that has befallen them. But I suppose I could talk at length on his achievements. Like without a doubt, he's on a personal note, he's given me some of the best memories of my life in 2003 and 05 and 08. When you were allowed on the pitch in Croke Park, I'll never forget the scenes. I'll never forget those memories, and they're something that'll live with myself, my family, my friends for a lifetime. So I suppose summing up, just Peter Canavan in his acceptance speech of Sam Maguire back in 03 said that, Mickey, words can't describe what you've done for me, what you've done for this team, but you know it. And I suppose as a Tyrone Gael, as a local councillor, and hopefully I'm speaking for at least the Tyrone councillors on the council here, that I hope and trust that Mickey Hart and his family do know and do appreciate what they have done for the population of this area. So I'd like to propose that at an appropriate time and when it's safe to do so, that Fermanagh and Omagh District Council would host a civic reception to honour Mickey Hart, to acknowledge his years of service and sporting achievement with Tyrone teams from minor, under 21 and indeed with the senior teams, and just to celebrate the 30 years of his tenure, the joy and memories that he's given us. So I'd like to formally propose that, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Emmett. Councillor Barry McElduff.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much, Chair, for allowing me in on this, and absolutely support the sentiments expressed by Councillor McAleer. Yesterday, Sunday, I wrote to our own council chairman, Chris Smith, and Alison, our chief executive, making that very suggestion. I said that I would like Chris to think about this as chair of the council, that we would indeed have a civic reception for Mickey Hart at the conclusion, at the end of this great era. Over the weekend, it has transpired too that the manager of the Tyrone ladies football team has stepped down as well, Jerry Moan, and Jerry has given great service to Tyrone ladies over the past 5 years. Now, we talk about the GAA almost as a medium for living it. It's as if you lived in Killybegs and you were talking about fishing, This is really important to us socially, culturally and economically, and we all get it in this council area. I'm sure some more than others for understandable traditional reasons, but I absolutely support the concept of, and I'm happy to second the formal proposal, but just to indicate that I had also written to the chair of the council and the chief executive making this very suggestion yesterday, Sunday. Thanks, Chair, for allowing me. And I suppose in the public domain I've surfaced the idea, and we're not North Korea, it's not compulsory, but surfaced the idea that people might want to wish to fly the flag on Friday within the boundaries of County Tyrone, or if you're from Tyrone and you're domiciled elsewhere. And I just gently say that, because I think it's very important that the people get a chance to participate. We're not all newspaper columnists. We're not all people with platforms. And the simple gesture of putting a flag out on your garden might be enough for some people to feel connected to this moment. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for that, Barry. Next hand up, I have Councillor Joe Deehan.
Thank you, Chair, and to support the proposal. Certainly, Mickey Hart has achieved something which is truly exceptional in GAA Tyrone football. But not only did he display exceptional leadership in the sporting arena, but also inspirational leadership to the players and supporters and all young people who came in contact with him. Indeed, people of all ages. They say, Chair, that tragedy is a refiner of the spirit, and we know that Mickey Hart and his family have been touched by tragedy. But I know that he has gone out of his way to inspire many people, and he has the interests of people at heart. And I think it is fitting that we should honour his achievement and celebrate the wonderful person that he is. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for that, Joe. Next hand up is Councillor Stephen Donnelly.
Thank you very much, Chair. And yes, I would just like to place on record my support for this proposal, because I think that this is a very significant moment in history for Tyrone GEA and for our county. And I suppose I just want to add the comment that Mickey Hart was significant for people of my own generation, in the sense that when I think back to the 3 occasions in which Tyrone won the Sam Maguire Cup, I think I was 8, 10 and 13 on the occasions when that happened. And when you think about the fact that before then Tyrone hadn't won it, it's quite significant that our generation grew up thinking and perceiving our county as being All-Ireland senior football champions, which was not something that was the case before. So Mickey's contribution to our sport, to our culture and to our history over the last 30 years of his contribution to our county has been significant. And I think it's more than appropriate that we as a council pay tribute very much to the contribution that he has made in the area of sports and of our culture. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that. Stephen, next is the Chair, Councillor Chris Smith.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose just to confirm what Councillor Michael Duff said, yes, he did contact me a few days ago asking for. I haven't responded yet, and I apologise to Barry for that. But I'm more than happy that we can maybe find some way to appropriately mark him, given the mark him to be the wrong word, but appropriately acknowledge the contribution that he's given. I have to give that one a wee bit of thought as what we can do within the circumstances, but I think it's appropriate that we do something. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Chris. Next hand up, Councillor Andy Feely.
Thank you, Kaylee. And just be brief as well. I just want to come in, as Councillor McAleer referenced there to Fermanagh councillors there. I do want to be associated with the good comments to Mickey Hart there. He was a great manager. As the success is seen there, and all weekend we're just hearing not only good terms coming about Mickey Hart on the Sunday game there last night, and the championship there, watching the games there on Sunday, and it's just not only the height of praise, and rightly so, but great success that Tyrone team made on under 21 level and senior level, seeing that came so beforehand. So it just shows you the kind of man he is, and I do want to be associated with them. And that's a great idea from Councillor McAluff there about all the Tyrone people putting out the flags on. I forget what Dave Barry said there, but even Tyrone people living away there. But being a Fermanagh man, I'd love to put it up with that. I'll not be fit to put a flag up, Barry, because married to a Donegal woman here, and just an odd tight tussle through the years there. So I'm sorry I'll not be putting a flag up, Barry, but great. I just want to be associated with the comments, and a great man Mickey was, and all the tragedy he has to. So just a great manager there, just associated with that. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Councillor Eamon Keenan is the final hand of indicating.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, fully agree with everybody there. Mickey's achievements both on and off the field are renowned. And going to make a wee suggestion, if sort of adding what Councillor Michael Duff was saying with the flags, and possibly to light up the Strool with Tyrone colours, if Emmett would accept that as an amendment.
I'd have to check with the Chief Executive as to whether that's...
Chair, we would need to see if there is availability for the building. First of all, there is a fairly tight schedule, as you know, of illuminations, but we could certainly check that to see if that's feasible. It would be something outside of our policy, so it would require council approval if that was something members are minded to pursue. And just to say that our illuminations would be linked on both main buildings, which would be Enniskillen Castle as well. It wouldn't be one site or the other.
Yeah, I think that'd be no problem. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Eamon. Annie, you looking back in, or is that...
Sorry, Paul, forgot to take it down. Sorry, Paul.
No problem. Councillor Seamus Green.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I would like to be associated with the comment that has been made. We had Mickey Hart, our own local club, dinner dance one night, and he did an absolutely amazing, inspirational presentation, and it was quite inspirational for our young people. He seems to be a great, genuine man. as a GAA man myself, I would always support, maybe surprisingly, that this to the Tyrone people, but I would always support my neighbouring counties whenever Fermanagh eventually goes out of the championship, and unfortunately it seems to be sooner rather than later in the last lucky years. And I'd also like to be associated with the comment about Tyrone ladies manager, who Jerry Moan, who's actually a neighbour of mine, and did great to bring All Ireland trophy to Tyrone with the ladies there. I think 2 years ago. So yeah, I agree with all the comments. So okay, thanks.
Thank you for that, Seamus. I've no other hands, so I would definitely echo Councillor Green's comments there about as being a Fermanagh fan also, and looking at envy across at our neighbours in Tyrone, a county I would always support also to see and encourage them to do well. And it's very much that we looked across and envy at all that he's achieved, and considering the suffering that he experienced as well, then he seems to be a remarkable man of remarkable courage and strength to have kept going the way that he did. So I think anything, I would be very supportive also of any efforts that can be made as a council to honour the contribution that he made to Tyrone football. So, Councillor McAleer, you want to come back in there?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank the other councillors for their support. I think Barry's suggestion about flying the flags is definitely a good one. It's just unfortunate that we'll not be flying them an Ulster final. I would just place on record that I'm fully supportive of the statements and commendations made at the ladies manager. The reason I didn't mention him previously was that during the successful All Ireland campaign, a cousin of mine was actually on the Tyrone team that year, so she has her All Ireland medal. So just in the interest of it possibly being construed as a conflict of interest, that's why, and I suppose just given the length of tenure of Mickey Hart, that's the explanation behind that one. But happy to echo the sentiments expressed, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Emmett. Thank you. So that's everybody. I have nobody else indicating and looking to come in on that. So that brings the meeting to a conclusion. Thank you, everyone, for your time, and thank you for asking so many questions of our guests from Intertrade Ireland. So I'll just bring this meeting to a close. So keep safe, everyone.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Chair, keep safe.
Thank you.
Barry. Oh, Paul, thanks. Well.